UFC 300, Pereira versus Hill. It is finally time, guys. We have waited so long for this. This is the card that we've wanted. This is the card that we've deserved. After watching all of those Apex cards through these past months, we finally have a generational card upon us here. I'm going to go through and break down these fights. There's not a single fight that is not can't see television, so let's get right into it. We are starting off with a matchup between Deiveson Figueiredo and Cody Garbrandt. This is, I think, an ideal matchup for Cody Garbrandt, given some of his recent history with, going on that few fight losing skid there. He gets to fight a guy who traditionally is a 125er, a guy who's a bit smaller, kind of like Cody, who's kind of on the smaller end of the spectrum of bantamweights, at least for, today's bantamweight division. And he's facing a guy at number 8, so it's his chance to crack the top 10. But Figgy looked really good in his bantamweight debut versus Rob Font. Of course, it kind of raises the question, how much was it Figgy looking really good versus Rob Font not looking great? Because let's face it, Font absolutely could not defend a takedown for his life. His chin is definitely very suspect. But I still think Figgy is a really interesting prospect at 135. He seems to have a bit better gas tank than he had when he was cutting down to 125. I know that was a really tough cut for him always. He always looks super emaciated and everything. I think Figgy's the more explosive guy out of these two, and he mixes in his wrestling really well. I don't see him really finding a finish on Cody Garbrandt because I think some of the shots he hit Rob Font with, I think Garbrandt's going to be able to eat him a little bit better. But I think he's going to have a more balanced approach here. I think he wins a decision here and sadly ruins everybody's every fight to end in finish parlay. Next fight up is a matchup between Bobby Green versus Jim Miller. Just the perfect UFC 300 fight to put on here. There's 101 pro fights between these two guys. They've been around the block. Jim Miller obviously fought at 100 and 200. Won at both of those events here. I'm taking Jim Miller to win to complete the trifecta, the triple crown, if you will. Bobby Green just got knocked out, and, given his age and his experience, I don't think it's that big of a thing to be concerned about. I mean, the guy's a pro, and, at that age, I can't imagine having that much of a chin to begin with. He knows his body. I don't think he would rush back into things if he was really worried about the chin being a huge problem. That being said, I think Jim Miller finds a finish. The guy's the second most prolific finisher in the UFC, and Bobby Green has been finished a few times. So even if it's not Bobby Green getting put stark out like he kind of did versus Drew Dober, I can see him getting wobbled, and then Jim Miller finding a choke here. Next fight up is Jessica Andrade taking on Marina Rodriguez. Andrade, let's face it, was looking really bad for a couple fights there. She got finished 3 times in a row and really just was not looking like herself. I kind of wrote her off, to be honest. Then going into that Amanda Lemos fight, going into the Mackenzie Dern fight, rather, I completely wrote her off. I thought this was just a layup for Dern, because Andrade really just did not look good. Her grappling looked pretty terrible in the fights leading up to that, and she had gotten finished a few times. But she turned back the clock and looked like her old self and found a KO finish in that fight. I think Andrade wins the decision here. Marina Rodriguez is a bit up there in age, and I don't know if she'll be able to take a shot, or I don't know if she'll be able to keep up with some of the power of Andrade here. I think this is just a big opportunity. Andrade knows to get back in the win column here and sort of resuscitate her career a little bit. All it takes is a big finish and then putting a few more fights in a row to get back in that title picture. So I think Andrade gets it done here with the decision. Next fight, it is Jalin Turner taking on Renato Moicano. It feels like Moicano's really only path to victory here is taking Jalin Turner down. Moicano has 0 KOs in the UFC. And if this is a stand-up fight, Turner hurts everybody he's stepped in the cage with pretty much. I mean, you look at the Dan Hooker fight, you look at the Garbrandt fight, he had both those guys hurt pretty bad at different times. Turner's just so big for the division, and I think the striking difference is going to be pretty appalling. If Moicano manages to, take Turner's back or something, I could see Turner having trouble getting up. I think that's one of his big struggles is when he gets taken down, having those long limbs. I mean, there's just like a lot for guys on top to hold on to be honest. But that being said, I don't think the fight even gets to that point. I think Turner finds a KO here. He's just going to be a lot longer on the feet, and the power difference is going to be pretty significant. Next up, we have Sodiq Yusuff versus Diego Lopes. Diego Lopes has kind of become a beloved fighter faster than one of the quickest times I've seen a fighter become this beloved this quick, I should say. The mullet certainly helps. The guy's super cool. I think him coming in on short notice versus Evloev and putting up the performance that he did despite losing did a lot to boost his popularity. He's come back to have back-to-back finishes after that. Super slick jiu-jitsu guy. He's got those 2 sub-wins, but Yusuff is a really tough guy, and I think he's physically going to give Diego Lopes a lot of issues. Some of these guys, they honestly just find ways to muscle themselves out of submissions or just not put themselves into position to those compromised positions in the first place. And I think he's the best striker that Lopes has fought by far. I mean, he's on a different level striking than Gavin Tucker and Pat Sabatini. So I think Yusuff wins a decision here. I think he keeps it standing and sort of separates himself in that department. And if he does take down Lopes or gets taken down, I think he's crafty enough and strong enough to fight off some of those submission threats. Next fight is Holm versus Kayla Harrison. Man, this is crazy. Holm, of course, in her 40s, hasn't looked that great as of late. Kayla Harrison, biggest question mark was she even going to be able to get in the octagon in the first place, make the weight cut? Well, she made the weight cut. Looked pretty good. I mean, definitely, I was appalled that she even made it down to 135. I'm sure she took every precaution necessary to do so because, she had said before that she wouldn't even dream of making it down to 135. I think this is the ideal matchup for her. Holm is just going to struggle with the physicality of Kayla Harrison. This is not Holm versus Ronda Rousey. Kayla's on a different level of just physical strength, and I think it's going to be pretty apparent here. I think she takes Holm down and gets a ground and pound finish here. Holm is just not going to be able to stand up with Kayla on top of her. Next up is Calvin Kattar versus Aljamain Sterling. This one is, we had a lot of fights on this card of guys who are coming off of injuries. Kattar's one of them. He's had an ACL injury. And I think Sterling, this is going to be a really good move up for him, similar to the success that Figgy had moving up. I think we're going to see him have a lot more gas in the tank, and it's not like he was a guy who struggled with stamina that much anyway. And Sterling in a 3-round matchup, I think he's just such a tough guy to go against because he can climb on your back, and that's just the round there. Even if he doesn't finish you, you're not getting him off your back, and really all you can do is just hope to fight off the different choke attempts that he's going to have on your back. I think it's fair to question how much Kattar's been able to work on his wrestling with that ACL injury. I mean, wrestling is uses your knees more than any other joint pretty much. And so for that reason, I'm taking Aljamain to win a decision here. Kattar, I think this is just a tough matchup to come back from an injury on. Even for a guy who historically has had a pretty good takedown defense, I think Aljamain, he's been looking big, and he's just super slick grappling. I think he bounces back from that KO defeat to Sean O'Malley and gets a decision win here. Woo! We're moving. Next up, it is Jiří Procházka taking on Aleksandar Rakic. Speaking of ACL injuries, Rakic is in his first fight since May of 2022. It's not his first career injury. So he's a guy who's kind of struggled with this throughout his career and hasn't really been able to have as much fights as he probably would hope to have at this point in his career and at his age. Procházka, for example, I think he has at least like 10 more career fights than Rakic. Procházka did not really impress me in that Pereira fight. I picked him to win that fight incorrectly, but he looked, just a lot less fluid than he had looked before the injury and the time off. Just looking at training videos, not much you can extrapolate from those, but he does look pretty good from what I've seen. He looks a lot more fluid. It looks like those shoulders are back to full strength as much as they can be after an injury like that. And I think his aggressive style is going to be really tough for Rakic. Procházka is a guy who I would fade in pretty much any matchup versus a power puncher, but Rakic is just not that guy. He's not as heavy-handed as some of the other guys in the light heavyweight division. I think that's going to benefit Procházka, and I think his relentless pressure is going to break Rakic, and he's going to find a KO in there. Moving on, we have Bo Nickal taking on Cody Brundage. Heaviest favorite in UFC history. Kind of crazy. Nickal has kind of turned heel in his sixth pro fight here. I have no problem with the UFC kind of promoting him. Yeah, he got that main event spot over some guys who perhaps deserve it a little bit more. Doesn't bother me. Bo Nickal has a lot of name recognition, which is rare for a guy kind of a prospect in the UFC to come into the UFC already with some name brand recognition. And in terms of being like a wrestling superstar, he's probably the number one, amateur wrestling name that could have possibly joined the UFC, save for maybe Gable Stevenson, who's a freak in his own right. But I don't see Brundage putting up much of a fight here. Bo Nickal already said he's seen the wrestling of Brundage and is not impressed. I think he finds a round one sub here and makes it look easy, to be quite frank. Next up, we have my most anticipated fight on the card here. It is Charles Oliveira taking on Arman Tsarukyan. Man, the striking matchup between these two is super interesting. I think Arman's got really underrated Muay Thai. You saw it in the Garbrandt fight. I mean, he showed a different level of striking, even though he lost that fight. He won that fight, but even though the judges didn't score him for that fight, you saw the striking ability, the difference there. Oliveira has some of the best striking in the division, though. Super powerful and just super long strikes, and he's accurate. I mean, the guy's apparently sees triple of everything. He's basically blind in there. And perhaps that's the best base for MMA is vision impairment. But yeah, I think if this was a kickboxing match, I think I would probably lean with Charles Oliveira, even though it's pretty close to 50-50 for me. Both guys have the power to put each other out. Arman has been KO'd before, and we know Charles is kind of a finish or be finished guy. The big difference maker in this fight, though, is most guys, I think, kind of cower away from Oliveira's guard. We saw it from Dariush. Dariush could get nothing going in Oliveira's guard, but I think Arman is going to be very comfortable taking Charles down, and I don't think he's going to be too threatened by Oliveira off his back. We saw what he was able to do in Yoel Alvarez's guard. He's another guy who's pretty tall for the division, and he still found a way to just implement ground and pound pretty viciously, and I see him doing the same thing here versus Charles Oliveira, as much as it pains me to say it because Oliveira is just such a savage. But it feels like Arman is just athletically superior, and he's just so strong. If he gets on top of Oliveira, I don't know how Oliveira gets him off of him. So Arman by ground and pound finish is going to be the pick there. Next fight is our first of the three title fights for the BMF belt, that is Justin Gaethje taking on Max Holloway. This fight is 5 rounds, which really changes my outlook on this fight. In a 3-round fight, I'd be heavily siding with the power of Justin Gaethje and just his approach. Everyone wants to say it's a new Gaethje, but I don't think he hasn't lost sight of the type of fighter that got him to this point, which is being erratic, throwing caution to the wind, and sometimes getting hit in order to hit your opponent. the guy's striking is so clean, but in a 5-round fight here, this could really get interesting if we start going into the 4th and 5th rounds, because I think Holloway's going to have the cardio advantage at that point. He's going to have more output on his side as well for the judges to look back on and potentially score him for this fight. So I'm definitely leaving this fight open a bit for potential live bet opportunities that we get later on. But, looking at that Korean Zombie fight, we saw Holloway get hit by some shots from Zombie that I think if Gaethje hit him with a similar shot, it'd be bad news for Holloway. And we saw Holloway get stumbled a little bit. I mean, the guy's got an iron chin, but, I think if Gaethje hits him cleanly, I think he definitely has the power to put him out. Gaethje has alluded that, his style of fighting, he's not going to point fight here. He's going to go for the finish like he always does. I think Gaethje finds a KO over Max Holloway. Gives him his first KO loss of his career. And I think the power difference is going to be the difference maker in that matchup. Our co-main event is a matchup between Zhang Weili and Yan Xiaonan. The Chinese matchup for the strawweight belt. Weili is a huge favorite, minus 550 favorite here, and that's because she's just on another level to her opponents as of late. If we start digging into Yan Xiaonan's resume, I think that's where people are getting really hesitant to back her. I mean, she got finished by Carla Esparza 3 years ago. Definitely a big red flag if Carla Esparza is able to put you out, especially if now you have to fight Zhang Weili, who's 10 times more athletic and just powerful. I think Zhang Weili finds a finish here. It seems like if she's able to get this fight to the ground, Xiaonan is going to have absolutely no answer. And even on the feet, I think there's going to be a pretty stark power difference as well between these two women. Of course, being a title fight, sort of anything goes. So, Xiaonan, I think there's some value to be had there because she's a plus 375 underdog, but I just wouldn't trust it. I think Weili is just on another level, and I've said it before. I think the only woman who's giving Weili a run for her money right now in that division is Rose Namajunas. Finally, we have our main event. It is Alex Pereira versus Jamahal Hill. Pereira, the people's champ. I will always be indebted to Alex Pereira because I put a future on him back in early 2021, whatever year it was, for him to be champ. That cashed me out. So I was backed him from the absolute beginning, and even then, he's surpassed my expectations for him. Came in with the crazy kickboxing pedigree, and the power was super apparent, and he's been able to win the belt at 185 and now has the belt at 205. I thought that matchup versus Jiří, some of how Pereira responds to getting hit, even in that Procházka fight that he won, and then of course both Izzy fights before that, the chin of Pereira is really scaring me in this matchup. The guy's been hit a lot in his career. He's up there in age and had all those kickboxing fights, and I think sometimes he kind of suffers from perhaps being used to having those big kickboxing gloves to shield him a little bit. I mean, he fights with his hands down as well to begin with. I think the big separator for me are the two chins of these guys. Jamal's never been put out before. And Pereira, it is possible to land on Pereira. The guy is one of the more powerful strikers in the UFC, but I think Jamal genuinely is just as powerful if he lands clean, so that's pretty negligible. But if both these guys, throw a punch and land at the same time, I think Pereira is the one who's going out. So Jamal by KO is going to be the pick there. Of course, it's going to be up to Pereira to get the leg kicks going early, and that can completely change the outlook of the fight. And it doesn't take long either. Jamahal Hill does not seem to have the best, or at least like the bounciest footwork. He's pretty flat-footed. Kind of like a Sean Strickland, if you want to call it that type of approach, where he's kind of plods forward. But I think he's going to be able to find Pereira's chin soon enough, and I don't think it'll take too long. I think within 2 rounds, Hill gets the KO finish over Alex Pereira and becomes the champion here. So that is the breakdown. Absolutely cannot wait for 300. Like and subscribe. Throw in the Twitter handle down below where I'm going to be posting all my picks, so follow that. But this has been the Phone Home MMA Breakdown. Peace.